whispers of the wilderness. The phone screen dims beside your pillow, casting the room back into darkness. One last email sent, one final decision made before sleep. If sleep will come, tonight, as you lie there with the weight you carry pressing against your chest, I want to take you somewhere else entirely. To a place where the decisions were life and death, where the pressure you feel was measured not in quarterly reports, but in the thunder of cannon fire. Where a young man, not unlike yourself, learned something profound about finding stillness in chaos. It's May 1864, and the morning mist clings to the Rapidan River like a shroud reluctant to lift. Picture this scene with me. The water moves slowly here in northern Virginia, dark and patient, reflecting the pale sky of dawn. Along its banks, the largest army ever assembled on American soil stirs to life. 120,000 men in blue uniforms, their breath visible in the cool air. Their voices a low murmur that carries across the water like distant thunder. You know that feeling when you're about to make a decision that will change everything. When you stand at the threshold of something vast and uncertain, your heart beating just a little faster than it should. That's the energy crackling through this army as they prepare to cross into what locals call simply the wilderness. The wilderness. Even the name carries weight, doesn't it? Not a forest or woods, but something more primal, more unknowable. Imagine 70 square miles of second-growth timber, so dense that sunlight struggles to reach the ground even at midday. Scrub oak and pine twisted together like gnarled fingers. Undergrowth so thick that a man could disappear just 10 feet from his companions. This is where they're heading, this vast green maze that swallows sound and distorts direction. Among these thousands of soldiers, there's one young man who catches our attention. We'll never know his name. The records don't tell us. But we know he wore the crossed flags of the Signal Corps on his sleeve. And we know that in his pack, wrapped carefully in oilcloth, he carried something that would outlive him by more than a century. A small leather journal, its pages soon to be filled with observations that would teach us something remarkable about finding calm in the storm. Let me paint this morning for you in the way he might have seen it. The air smells of wood smoke and coffee, leather and metal, the earthy scent of the river. Horses stamp and snort, their breath steaming. Wagon wheels creak as supply trains lumber into position. Officers move between the ranks, their voices carrying that particular tone of men trying to sound more confident than they feel. Our signal corpsman stands at the river's edge, watching the engineers lay their pontoon bridges across the dark water. The planks echo hollowly as they're positioned, each sound sharp in the morning air. He's young, perhaps 22, with ink-stained fingers from the dispatches he writes and sends. His job is communication, keeping the threads of command connected across vast distances, ensuring that orders flow down and information flows up through the complex organism of this massive army. But there's something else about him, something that sets him apart from his fellow soldiers. While they joke nervously or write hurried letters home, he watches. He observes. He notices the way fear and courage dance together in a man's eyes, the way silence can be more powerful than shouting, the way a moment of stillness can stretch like eternity in the midst of chaos. You understand this, don't you? In your own battles, the board meetings that feel like warfare, the decisions that keep you awake at night, the responsibility for all those who depend on what you're building. You've learned to watch, to observe, to find those moments of clarity that cut through the noise. The order comes down at dawn, forward, march. And like a great blue serpent, the Army of the Potomac begins to move. Our signal corpsman shoulders his pack, checks his equipment one final time, and steps onto the pontoon bridge. The planks flex slightly under his weight, the river flowing beneath his feet like time itself, carrying away the last moments of certainty. As they cross into the wilderness, the quality of light changes immediately. The canopy overhead filters the sun into a green twilight, even though it's barely past sunrise. The familiar sounds of the army, the jingle of harness, the rhythm of marching feet, the casual conversation of soldiers, all of it becomes muffled, absorbed by the dense vegetation pressing in on all sides. There's something unsettling about this place, not just the tactical disadvantage it represents, though that's real enough. Artillery becomes useless here, cavalry nearly so. Formations that work on open ground become impossible to maintain. But there's something deeper, more primal. This is a place where the usual rules don't apply, where the civilized order of military discipline meets something wilder, older, more elemental. Our young signal corpsman feels it too. He notices how conversations drop to whispers without anyone giving the order, how men instinctively move closer together as the trees press in, how even the most veteran soldiers keep glancing over their shoulders as if the forest itself might be watching them. But here's what's remarkable about our observer. Instead of letting the unease consume him, he begins to write. Not official dispatches, not military reports, but personal observations in his small leather journal. And what he writes reveals something extraordinary about the human capacity for finding peace in turmoil. The trees here, he notes in his careful script, seem to hold secrets in their shadows. But secrets are not necessarily threats. Sometimes they are simply mysteries waiting to be understood. Think about that for a moment. Here is a young man marching into what will become one of the bloodiest battles in American history, and instead of focusing on his fear, he's choosing to see mystery rather than menace, wonder rather than terror. He's discovering what the Stoics knew, that we cannot always control what happens to us, but we can always choose how we respond. As the army moves deeper into the wilderness, the normal rhythms of military life begin to break down. Companies become separated by the dense undergrowth. Officers lose sight of their men. The careful order that defines army life starts to fray at the edges. For most soldiers, this is deeply unsettling. The army is their security, their identity, their protection against chaos. But our signal corpsman makes another observation, one that speaks directly to what you know about leadership. When the familiar structures fall away, he writes, what remains is not chaos, but the opportunity to discover what we truly are beneath all the noise. You felt this, haven't you? Those moments when the usual frameworks don't apply, when the playbook doesn't have answers, when you're forced to rely on something deeper than process or procedure, when the weight you carry becomes not just responsibility, but a kind of clarity about what really matters. The wilderness strips away pretense. In this green labyrinth, rank matters less than character. Training matters less than adaptability. The ability to follow orders matters less than the wisdom to know when orders no longer apply. Our young observer is beginning to understand that this place, frightening as it is, might also be a teacher. As the morning progresses, the army's advance slows to a crawl. Units bunch up as the narrow paths force them into single file. The heat builds under the canopy, and sweat begins to mix with the dust and pollen that drift down from the disturbed branches overhead. Tempers start to fray. Men curse the heat, the terrain, the officers who led them into this green hell. But listen to what our signal corpsman notices. In the spaces between complaints, he writes, I hear something else. The forest breathing. The small sounds of life continuing despite our presence. A reminder that there are rhythms larger than our urgency. This is wisdom that transcends the battlefield, isn't it? In your own wilderness moments, when the market shifts unexpectedly, when key people leave, when the path forward becomes unclear, there are always those larger rhythms, the deeper currents that continue flowing regardless of our immediate crisis. Learning to hear them, to align with them rather than fight against them, is perhaps the most crucial skill any leader can develop. The morning stretches toward noon, and still the army pushes deeper into the wilderness. Our young observer continues to write, continues to notice, continues to find in this place of potential terror something approaching. Not peace exactly, but a kind of profound acceptance, an understanding that some challenges cannot be avoided, only met with whatever grace and courage we can muster. The path ahead disappears into green shadows, he notes, but every step reveals the next step. Perhaps this is enough. Perhaps this has always been enough. And so they march deeper into the unknown, this vast army, and our unnamed observer carrying with them all the hopes and fears that humans bring to uncertain ventures. The weight of command, the pressure of expectations, the knowledge that decisions made in the next few hours will echo through history. But in his journal, our signal corpsman captures something else, a growing sense that even in the heart of chaos, even in the depths of the wilderness, there are lessons to be learned about stillness, about presence, about finding calm in the very center of the storm. The forest closes around them like a living thing, and somewhere ahead, Destiny waits in the shadows, entangled and lost. The morning air carries the scent of pine and damp earth as the great blue columns wind deeper into Virginia's heart. Our signal corpsman adjusts his equipment, the brass fittings catching occasional shafts of sunlight that pierce the canopy above. He's been awake since before dawn, checking his flags, his torches, his carefully maintained logbooks. The weight of communication, of being the thread that connects scattered units across miles of uncertain terrain, it settles on his shoulders like morning mist. You know this feeling, don't you? That sense of being the critical link, the one who must hold the center when everything else threatens to fragment, the one checking messages at midnight, ensuring nothing falls through the cracks while others sleep. As the army moves deeper into the wilderness, something begins to change. The neat formations that looked so orderly on the morning parade grounds start to bend and stretch like taffy. Companies find themselves separated by walls of thorny undergrowth. Regiments discover that the roads marked on their maps simply don't exist where they're supposed to be. Our signal corpsman climbs a small rise, hoping for a clear view to establish communication with the advance units. But everywhere he looks, trees. Endless, tangled, impenetrable green. The forest seems to swallow sound itself. Voices that should carry across open ground are muffled, distorted, lost in the maze of branches and brambles. He raises his signal flag, the bright red fabric a stark contrast against the green confusion. But who can see it? The units he's meant to coordinate have vanished into the woodland like stones dropped into deep water. His carefully planned communication points, useless now, his protocols and procedures, designed for open battlefields and clear sightlines, crumble in the face of this green chaos. There's something profound here about the plans we make, the systems we build, the careful structures we create to manage complexity. How quickly they can become inadequate when reality refuses to conform to our expectations. How the very thing we thought would give us control reveals instead how little control we actually have. The first shots ring out somewhere to the east, not the organized volleys of a planned engagement, but scattered, confused firing, units stumbling into each other in the undergrowth. Friend or foe becomes impossible to determine when you can barely see 20 yards in any direction. Our signal corpsman feels the familiar weight of responsibility pressing down. Officers are shouting for communications with headquarters. Runners disappear into the forest and simply don't return. The careful choreography of military coordination dissolves into something far more primitive, far more uncertain. He makes a decision that will echo through his journal entries for weeks to come. Instead of staying with the main body, desperately trying to maintain communications that can't be maintained, he begins to move forward, into the confusion itself, not to impose order, but to understand the disorder, not to control the chaos, but to find his place within it. The deeper he goes, the more disorienting it becomes. Paths that seem to lead somewhere simply end. Clearings that appear on maps exist only in the mapmaker's imagination. Units march in circles, following what they believe are roads, but are actually just game trails that wind endlessly through the undergrowth. He passes a group of soldiers who've stopped to rest against a massive fallen oak. Their faces show something beyond exhaustion, a kind of bewilderment. These are men who fought in dozens of battles, who know the rhythm of advance and retreat, charge and countercharge. But here all their experience counts for nothing. The forest has stripped away their certainties, left them as lost as children in a fairy tale. Perhaps you recognize this feeling too. That moment when all your experience, all your careful planning, all your hard-won expertise suddenly seems inadequate to the challenge before you. When the market shifts in ways no one predicted, when the team you've built faces problems no playbook covers, when the very success you've achieved puts you in territory no map can guide you through. Our signal corpsman continues deeper into the maze. The sounds of battle grow closer but more scattered. Individual shots, shouts that cut off mid-sentence, the crash of men moving through undergrowth too thick for any organized advance. And then he finds it, rising above the surrounding canopy like a lighthouse in a green sea. A massive pine tree, ancient and solitary. Its trunk is easily 6 feet across, its crown reaching perhaps 100 feet into the sky. For the first time since entering the wilderness, he can see, not everything, but something. a perspective higher than the immediate confusion. He begins to climb. The bark is rough under his hands, sticky with resin that catches his uniform, his equipment. Branch by branch, he ascends above the chaos below. With each foot of elevation, the sounds of confusion grow more distant, not because they're stopping, but because he's rising above them. Halfway up, he pauses to catch his breath and look around. From here, he can see the patterns the men on the ground cannot. How units have been separated by ravines they couldn't see from ground level. How the roads curve and branch in ways that make sense only from above. How what seems like hopeless confusion from within has a kind of structure when viewed from sufficient height. He continues climbing until he reaches a broad fork in the trunk, a natural platform where he can secure himself and his equipment. From here, nearly 80 feet above the forest floor, he can see for miles. The great army below him, scattered and confused, becomes visible as something more than chaos. Not ordered, but not random either. Like a river that's broken into many streams but still flows toward the same distant sea. In his journal that evening, he'll write about this tree, this signal tree as he comes to call it, how it became not just an observation post, but a metaphor for a different kind of leadership. Not the leadership that tries to control every variable, but the leadership that seeks the right perspective, the right elevation, from which to see patterns invisible from ground level. He'll write about how the climb itself, the physical act of rising above the immediate crisis, created a kind of mental clarity he hadn't expected, how the effort required to reach that height, the deliberate, careful movement from branch to branch, had the unexpected effect of calming his racing mind. From his perch in the signal tree, he begins to understand something that will change how he thinks about his role entirely. Communication isn't just about transmitting orders from above or reports from below. Sometimes, perhaps most importantly, it's about finding the perspective from which the larger pattern becomes visible. The battle rages below him, confused and confusing. But from here, in this moment of elevation and clarity, our signal corpsman begins to see not just what is happening, but what it might teach about finding stillness within chaos, purpose within confusion, and perhaps most importantly, peace within the very heart of uncertainty. The forest that seemed so threatening from within, from here reveals itself as something else entirely. A teacher, perhaps, a reminder that sometimes the very thing that disorients us also holds the key to a deeper kind of understanding. Hunched, flames of despair, and yet, even as our young signal corpsman begins to glimpse this deeper understanding from his perch above the canopy, the forest below erupts into something far more terrible than mere confusion. The crack of musket fire has been building steadily through the morning, scattered at first, then growing into the sustained roar that marks real battle. From his elevated position, he can see muzzle flashes winking through the undergrowth like deadly fireflies. The air fills with smoke, not just the grey-white clouds of gunpowder, but something else. Something that makes his stomach clench with a new kind of dread. Orange tongues begin licking at the base of distant trees. The wilderness, you see, is not just dense, it is dry. Decades of fallen leaves, brittle undergrowth, and dead wood have created a tinderbox. And now, with thousands of men firing muskets in every direction, with cannon belching flame and hot metal, the inevitable begins to happen. The forest catches fire. At first, it's just small patches, scattered flames that seem almost manageable against the vastness of the woods. But fire, like panic, has its own terrible logic. It spreads not just through the brush, but through the hearts of men who suddenly face an enemy they cannot fight with bayonets or courage. Our signal corpsman watches in growing horror as the scattered orange dots begin to connect, forming lines of flame that race through the undergrowth with frightening speed. The wind, which had seemed so gentle in the treetops, now becomes an accomplice to destruction, pushing the fire forward in hungry waves. Below, the sounds of battle begin to change. The organized volleys of musket fire become more ragged, more desperate. Men who moments before were focused on the enemy across the clearing now find themselves surrounded by a different kind of adversary entirely. And in the midst of this growing chaos, individual stories of human resilience begin to unfold. There is a young Confederate soldier, barely 18, who finds himself cut off from his unit when a wall of flame erupts between him and his retreat. The weight he carries, it's not just his musket and pack, but the letter from his mother tucked inside his jacket, the promise he made to come home to help with the harvest. He could panic. Many do. But instead, he does something remarkable. He stops, takes a breath, looks around with the kind of clarity that sometimes emerges only in the most desperate moments. He spots a small creek, barely visible through the smoke, and begins moving toward it with deliberate purpose. Not running, which would only feed the panic rising in his chest, but walking with intention. This is what you do, isn't it? When the pressures of what you're building threaten to overwhelm everything, when the fires of crisis seem to be spreading faster than you can contain them, you stop, you breathe, you look for the creek. Meanwhile, deeper in the burning maze, a Union sergeant finds 3 of his men trapped in a pocket of flame. The obvious path is blocked. The smoke is so thick they can barely see 10 feet ahead. The weight this man carries, it's the knowledge that these soldiers trusted him to lead them safely through whatever hell they might face. He doesn't have a map for this. No training manual covers how to navigate a forest fire while under enemy fire. But he has something else, the ability to break an impossible situation into manageable pieces. First, wet their shirts with water from canteens. Then, identify the direction where the smoke seems thinnest. Finally, move together, staying low, checking on each other every few steps. It's not unlike the decisions you make when everything seems to be burning at once. When the market shifts, when key people leave, when the funding falls through and the product launch hits unexpected problems all in the same week. You don't solve it all at once. You wet your shirt. You find the thinnest smoke. You move together. But perhaps the most remarkable figure emerging from this chaos is someone we haven't met before. A Confederate nurse named Sarah, who has set up a makeshift aid station in a small clearing that, for the moment, remains untouched by flame. Sarah carries a different kind of weight entirely. She's not responsible for winning battles or leading men through tactical maneuvers. Her burden is simpler and somehow more profound. She must create pockets of healing in the midst of destruction. Places where humanity can reassert itself against the madness. As wounded soldiers from both sides begin stumbling into her clearing, some carried by comrades, others dragging themselves through sheer will, Sarah makes a choice that defines her character. She doesn't ask about uniforms or allegiances. She simply sees the need and responds to it. Watch her work. There's something almost meditative in the way she moves from patient to patient. Not rushed, despite the urgency. Not panicked, despite the growing wall of flame visible through the trees. She has found, in the midst of absolute chaos, a kind of moving stillness. When a young Union soldier, badly burned, cries out for his mother, Sarah doesn't hesitate. She kneels beside him, takes his hand, and speaks in the voice he needs to hear. When a Confederate officer, his leg shattered by grape shot, tries to refuse treatment because Union wounded are also present, she simply continues her work and lets her actions speak. This is leadership of a different kind. Not the leadership that commands from heights or directs grand strategies, but the leadership that creates small islands of sanity in an insane world. The leadership that says, through action rather than words, here in this small space, different rules apply. The flames continue to spread, the smoke grows thicker, the sounds of battle become increasingly confused as units lose contact with each other, as planned maneuvers dissolve into desperate improvisation. And yet, in these individual moments of human connection, something else is being built. Our signal corpsman, still in his tree but now coughing from the smoke that rises even to his elevated position, begins to understand something crucial. The chaos below isn't just destruction, it's also revelation. When everything familiar burns away, what remains is often the most essential part of who we are. The young Confederate soldier reaches his creek and helps 2 Union soldiers he finds there, their uniforms irrelevant in the face of shared survival. The Union sergeant and his men emerge from their pocket of flame, singed but intact, their trust in each other deepened by the trial. And Sarah continues her work, creating something that transcends the madness around her. The fire will burn itself out eventually. The battle will end, though not as anyone planned. But these moments of human choice in the face of chaos, these small victories of character over circumstance, These will echo forward in ways that no one present can yet imagine. Sometimes, when the weight you carry feels overwhelming, when the very thing you're building seems threatened by forces beyond your control, remember this. Remember that in the midst of the flames, people found creeks, found each other, found ways to choose compassion over chaos. The fire reveals as much as it destroys. A moment of respite, and in those moments when the fire revealed more than it destroyed, when the smoke began to clear in scattered pockets, something remarkable emerged from the devastation. A makeshift field hospital had taken shape in a small clearing where an old farmhouse stood partially damaged but still standing. The building itself seemed to exhale relief, its weathered walls now sheltering something entirely different from what they had known just days before. Here, in this unexpected sanctuary, the arbitrary lines that had driven men to fight began to blur into something more fundamental, something more true. The Confederate nurse we glimpsed earlier, the one who had created that small circle of healing amid the flames, she moved between rough wooden tables with a quiet determination that seemed to draw strength from some deep well within her. Her name was Sarah, though few would ever know it. Her story would never appear in any official record. But watch her hands as she tends to a young Union soldier, barely 18, his uniform burned away, his face pale with shock. She doesn't see blue or grey. She sees someone's son, someone who had been writing letters home just that morning before the world caught fire around him. The boy's eyes follow her movements, confused perhaps by this kindness from someone he had been taught to consider his enemy. But pain has a way of stripping away such constructions, revealing the simple human truth beneath. Water, he whispers, and she brings it without hesitation. 3 tables over. A Confederate sergeant sits upright, despite a bandaged shoulder, helping to hold down another soldier, this one wearing Union blue, while a weary doctor works to extract shrapnel. The sergeant speaks in low, steady tones, offering what comfort he can to a man who hours earlier might have been trying to kill him. This is what emerges when everything else burns away. Not the grand strategies or the political rhetoric, but this. The fundamental recognition that suffering calls to something deeper than allegiance. That healing requires no permission from generals or governments. The doctor himself, a Union surgeon named Matthews, moves between patients with the focused exhaustion of someone who has learned to find purpose in the immediate task at hand. His hands shake slightly, not from fear, but from the accumulated weight of too many decisions, too many lives balanced on the edge of his skill and judgment. Yet there's something almost meditative in his movements. Each stitch placed with deliberate care, each bandage wrapped as if it were the only thing that mattered in the world. Because in that moment it is. You know this feeling, don't you, when the complexity of everything you're building, all the moving pieces, the competing priorities, the impossible decisions, suddenly crystallizes into one clear action, one thing you can do, one person you can help, one problem you can actually solve. The weight doesn't disappear, but it finds a different shape, a more manageable form. Sarah pauses beside a young Confederate soldier who can't be more than 16. His leg is badly injured, and he keeps asking for his mother. She sits beside him for a moment, just sits, and places her hand on his forehead. No medical procedure, no urgent intervention, just presence. The boy's breathing slows, his grip on the rough blanket loosens slightly. Sometimes this is the most powerful medicine, the simple act of bearing witness to someone's fear, of saying without words that they are not alone in it. Around them, the makeshift hospital hums with quiet activity. Other women, some Confederate, some local civilians who had emerged from hiding when the immediate danger passed, work alongside Union medics. They share supplies without discussion. They share knowledge. They share the unspoken understanding that in this space, the only sides that matter are the living and the dying. An older woman, perhaps 60, tends a small fire where she's heating water and preparing what food can be managed. Her movements are economical, practiced. She's clearly done this before, perhaps in other wars, other crises. Her face carries the particular weariness of someone who has seen enough suffering to know that the only response is to act. She catches Sarah's eye across the room and nods toward a pot of broth. Without words, they coordinate the feeding of those who can manage it. a small efficiency born of shared purpose. Watch how naturally this cooperation emerges. No committees formed, no protocols established, just the immediate recognition of what needs to be done and the quiet decision to do it together. This is leadership in its most essential form. Not the kind that commands from elevated positions, but the kind that emerges from proximity to real need. The kind that finds authority not in titles or structures, but in the simple willingness to step toward what is broken and try to mend it. Dr. Matthews finishes with one patient and moves to the next. A Confederate officer with a head wound who drifts in and out of consciousness. As the doctor works, the officer mumbles fragments of what sounds like a letter to his wife. Scattered words about harvest time, about missing her voice, about hoping to be home for Christmas. The doctor listens while he works, not because the words contain any medical information, but because listening is part of the healing. Because being heard, even in delirium, matters to the fundamental human work of staying connected to what we love. You understand this, perhaps more than you realize. How many conversations have you had where the real healing happened not in the solutions offered, but in the simple act of being truly heard, of having someone witness the weight you carry without immediately trying to fix it or minimize it? As evening approaches, the quality of light in the makeshift hospital begins to change. Softer now, more golden. Someone has managed to find oil for several lamps, and they cast a warm glow that transforms the rough space into something that feels almost peaceful. Sarah moves to the doorway for a moment, breathing the cooler air. Behind her, the quiet sounds of tending continue. Soft voices, the rustle of bandages, the gentle scrape of spoons against bowls as those who can eat are fed. She looks out at the wilderness, still scarred, still smoking in places, but no longer burning. The immediate crisis has passed. What remains is the longer work. The patient work, the work of healing that happens not in dramatic moments, but in the accumulation of small acts of care. This is what endures after the fires pass. Not the grand gestures or the heroic charges, but this. The quiet determination to tend what can be tended, to heal what can be healed, to create small spaces of order and compassion in the midst of larger chaos. The weight you carry, the thing you're building, it too will face its fires, moments when everything feels threatened, when the very foundations seem to shake. But remember this makeshift hospital. Remember how quickly healing can organize itself around simple human need. How naturally cooperation emerges when the stakes become clear. Remember that your deepest strength may not be in preventing every crisis, but in your capacity to create spaces where healing can happen after the flames pass. Sarah turns back toward the hospital, toward the work that will continue through the night. Her steps are steady, purposeful. She carries her own weight, her own fears about what tomorrow might bring. But she has found something to do with that weight, something useful, something that serves what she loves. The fire reveals as much as it destroys. And what it reveals, sometimes, is exactly what we're capable of when everything else falls away. At Campfire Reflections, the flames have died to embers now, and in the Confederate lines, barely a mile away through the charred undergrowth, another kind of fire burns. Smaller fires. Campfires ringed by men who sit closer together than they might have yesterday morning. The weight of the day settles on shoulders already bent by months of campaigning. These soldiers, boys really, many of them, stare into flames that remind them too much of what they witnessed in the brush. The acrid smell of smoke still clings to their uniforms, their hair, their memories. Private James Whitmore pulls his knees closer to his chest. 18 years old, from a small farm outside Richmond, his cartridge box sits empty beside him. 20 rounds fired into the green hell of the wilderness, and he cannot say with certainty that any found their mark. Cannot say, really, what he was shooting at most of the time. Shadows. Movement. Fear itself, perhaps. The boy next to him, Thomas, rocks slightly as he stares into the fire. Thomas hasn't spoken since they pulled back to this position, hasn't eaten the hardtack someone pressed into his hands. Just rocks and watches flames that dance like the brush fires that nearly claimed his company that afternoon. You understand this weight, don't you? The weight of responsibility when everything depends on your next decision. When people are counting on you to know what you're doing. even when the path forward disappears into smoke and uncertainty. These soldiers carry a different burden than yours, but the essence remains the same: the weight of others' trust, the weight of consequences you cannot fully predict. Sergeant Morrison moves among his men with quiet purpose. 23 years old, though his eyes carry decades more, he checks on each soldier, not their equipment now, but their spirits. A hand on a shoulder here, a quiet word there. He knows that tomorrow will ask everything of these boys. And he knows that some of them are already giving more than they have. Eat something, he tells Thomas gently, the same voice he might use with his own younger brother back home. You'll need your strength. Thomas looks up, eyes unfocused, then slowly reaches for the hardtack. Not because he's hungry, but because Sergeant Morrison asked. Because sometimes we do what we must, not what we want. Because sometimes the weight we carry becomes bearable only when we remember we're not carrying it alone. Around another fire, slightly larger, the officers gather. Captain Reynolds studies a map by flickering light, though maps seem almost useless in this tangled country. The wilderness swallows plans, devours careful strategies, reduces everything to instinct and improvisation. He traces roads that may or may not exist anymore, calculates distances through terrain that defies calculation. We'll move at first light, he says quietly. Not because he's certain it's the right decision, but because decisions must be made. Because leadership sometimes means choosing a direction when all directions look equally uncertain. You know this feeling, the weight of choosing when perfect information doesn't exist, when waiting for certainty means never moving at all. Lieutenant Haze nods, though his hand trembles slightly as he folds his own map. 21 years old, commissioned just 3 months ago. Yesterday he led 37 men into the wilderness. Tonight he counts 29 around the fires. 8 men who won't see tomorrow's uncertain light. 8 weights added to the burden he carries. But here's what strikes our Signal Corps man, watching from his elevated position. Here's what he notices about these Confederate fires scattered through the darkness. Despite the losses, despite the fear that sits heavy as smoke in the air, there's something else present. Something harder to name, but impossible to miss. Purpose. Not the grand purpose of causes and politics, but the intimate purpose of men who have found something worth protecting, worth enduring for. The soldier next to you, the sergeant who checks on your welfare, the captain who studies maps by firelight because someone must plan for tomorrow. And then, a stirring through the camp. Word passes from fire to fire like a gentle wind. General Lee is walking among the men. You can feel the change before you see him. Backs straighten slightly, conversations quiet to respectful murmurs, not from fear, but from something deeper. Recognition, perhaps. The acknowledgement that here walks someone who carries the weight they all share, but carries it willingly, purposefully, with a grace that makes their own burdens feel less impossible. Lee moves slowly through the firelight, 67 years old, hair and beard white as winter, but his presence fills spaces larger than his slight frame should command. He stops at each fire, not to inspect or evaluate, but simply to be present, to see and be seen. At Private Whitmore's fire, Lee pauses. How are you boys holding up? The question is simple, but the way he asks it, the way he waits for the answer, suggests he genuinely wants to know. Whitmore stammers something about being fine, sir, ready for whatever comes next. But Lee's eyes, those eyes have seen too much to be fooled by brave words from frightened boys. This country tests us all, Lee says quietly. The wilderness doesn't care about our plans or our preparations. It strips everything down to what matters most. He looks around the small circle of faces, and what matters most is that we take care of each other, that we remember why we're here. Thomas looks up from his hardtack, the first real engagement with the world around him since the afternoon's chaos. General, are we doing the right thing? All this? Does it mean something? A harder question than it might seem. The kind of question you've asked yourself in those 2 a.m. moments when doubt creeps in around the edges of exhaustion, when the weight of what you're building feels suddenly fragile, uncertain, possibly meaningless in the vast scope of things beyond your control. Lee considers the boy's question with the seriousness it deserves. I believe, he says finally, that we're called to be faithful to what we love, to protect what we value, regardless of how the larger story unfolds. We cannot control outcomes, Thomas. We can only control how we show up for each other when everything else falls apart. The general moves on to other fires, other conversations, but his words settle over the camp like warmth from the flames themselves. Not false comfort or empty reassurance, but something more substantial. The recognition that meaning doesn't require certainty. That purpose can exist even when outcomes remain hidden in smoke and darkness. Private Whitmore looks down at his empty cartridge box. Then across the fire at Thomas, who's actually eating now. Tomorrow will bring fresh ammunition and fresh uncertainty. But tonight they have this fire, these faces, this shared understanding that they're part of something larger than their individual fears. The weight remains, the uncertainty persists. But somehow, in the quiet space between firelight and darkness, it all feels more bearable, more human, more real than all the grand strategies and noble causes that brought them to this tangled place. This is what crisis teaches us, isn't it? That meaning lives not in the outcomes we cannot control, but in how we choose to show up for what we love when everything else burns away. The unbroken will. The morning of May the 7th arrives grey and still, smoke hanging in the air like unfinished thoughts. The armies face each other across ground that has already seen too much. Neither advancing, neither retreating, just holding. This is the space you know well, isn't it? That moment when forward momentum stalls, when the path ahead becomes unclear, when all you can do is tend to what's immediately before you and wait for clarity to emerge. Our signal corpsman moves through the camps in these quiet hours, observing how men sustain themselves when the outcome hangs in balance. He watches a Massachusetts private sharing his last piece of hardtack with a boy from Ohio whose rations ran out yesterday. Neither speaks of it, just the simple passing of bread from one hand to another. In the Confederate lines, a sergeant from Georgia sits beside a wounded Tennessee boy, not saying much, just present. The boy's fever broke in the night, and now they share the peculiar peace that comes after crisis passes. The sergeant whittles a small piece of wood, shavings falling like snow between his boots, while the boy watches clouds move across the canopy above. These small acts, they're what hold the center when everything else threatens to collapse, aren't they? The quiet faithfulness to each other when grand plans dissolve into uncertainty. The signal corpsman notices something else in these suspended hours. How resilience reveals itself not in dramatic gestures, but in the simple decision to keep going. A cook from Pennsylvania tends his fire with the same care he showed 3 days ago, before the world turned upside down. His hands steady, his attention complete, as if making coffee for exhausted men were the most important work in the world. Perhaps it is. Near a small stream that winds through the forest, past an overturned supply wagon abandoned in yesterday's chaos. Soldiers from both sides come to fill their canteens. They maintain a careful distance, a tacit understanding. But there's something almost sacred about sharing this simple need for clean water. The stream doesn't choose sides, it simply flows, clear and constant, offering what it has to anyone who approaches with empty vessels. You carry this same stream within you, don't you? This capacity to keep flowing, to keep offering what you have, even when the landscape around you shifts and changes beyond recognition. As the day wears on, word begins to spread through the Union camps. General Grant, instead of ordering a retreat as his predecessors might have done, is preparing to move forward. Not back toward safety, but deeper into Virginia, toward Richmond, toward whatever comes next. The men receive this news in different ways, some with grim determination, others with quiet resignation, many with something that might be relief. At least the waiting is ending. At least they're moving toward something rather than away from it. The signal corpsman watches one particular moment that stays with him. A young corporal from Maine, barely 18, sits on a fallen log writing a letter home. His hands shake slightly, not from fear but from exhaustion, from carrying weight too heavy for his years. But he writes anyway, carefully, thoughtfully, telling his mother about the kindness of his sergeant, about the beauty of morning light through smoke, about how he's learning that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the decision to keep loving what matters most even when everything feels uncertain. This is what you do too, isn't it? In your own way, in your own circumstances, you keep writing the letter. Keep building what matters. Keep showing up for the people counting on you, even when your hands shake with the weight of it all. The afternoon brings preparation, the quiet efficiency of men who have learned to pack their lives into what they can carry. They check their equipment, share what they have, say what needs saying to those who matter. But there's something different in their movements now, something that wasn't there 3 days ago when they first crossed the Rapidan with bands playing and flags flying. They're quieter now, more deliberate, more present to each small moment. They've learned what you know, that real strength isn't found in the absence of difficulty, but in how we choose to meet it, how we choose to care for each other, how we choose to keep faith with what we're building, even when we can't see the end of the road. As evening approaches, the signal corpsman climbs his tree one final time before the army moves on. From this height, he can see the smoke still rising from yesterday's fires, the cleared spaces where men have camped and rested and found their footing again. But he can also see the road ahead, winding south through green Virginia countryside toward whatever challenges and possibilities await. The path is uncertain, but it continues. It leads somewhere, and these men, changed by what they've endured, will walk it together, just as you will walk yours. Not because the way is clear, but because what you're building, what you're protecting, what you love, is worth the journey. The weight remains, but so does the will to carry it forward, and enduring hope. And as these armies begin their slow movement toward Laurel Hill, you can feel something shifting in the very air itself. The desperate urgency of the wilderness is giving way to something quieter, more measured, like the steady rhythm of worn boots on dusty roads. Watch how they walk now, these men who have seen fire and smoke, who have looked into the face of uncertainty and chosen to continue. Their steps are different somehow. Not the eager march of untested soldiers, but the deliberate pace of those who understand that endurance, not speed, wins the longest battles. There's a Confederate private, his uniform torn and stained, pausing to help a fallen comrade adjust his pack. No grand gesture, no witness to record his kindness, just one tired soul recognizing another's burden. This is how hope actually moves through the world, not in proclamations or strategies, but in the small choice to extend your hand when your own strength is nearly spent. And here, a Union sergeant sharing his last piece of hardtack with a younger soldier who's been marching in silence for miles. The boy's eyes hold that particular exhaustion you know well, the weight of responsibility settling on shoulders still learning to bear it. But in accepting that simple gift, in the quiet nod of gratitude, something passes between them. An understanding that we carry each other, even when we can barely carry ourselves. This is what endures, when the smoke clears and the immediate crisis passes. Not the grand plans or the bold declarations, but these threads of connection, these moments when someone chooses compassion over convenience, presence over protection. The landscape itself seems to understand. As the armies move south, the Virginia countryside offers its own quiet gifts. Wildflowers pushing through disturbed earth, streams running clear despite everything, birds returning to trees that yesterday echoed with cannon fire. Nature doesn't hurry its healing, but neither does it abandon the work. In Grant's tent tonight, as he studies maps by lamplight, you can see the weight of command in every line of his face. The decisions that must be made, the letters that must be written to families who will never see their sons again. The terrible mathematics of leadership when human lives hang in the balance, but watch his hands as he traces the roads toward Laurel Hill. Steady, deliberate. Not the frantic gestures of someone overwhelmed, but the careful movements of someone who has accepted that uncertainty is the only certainty. And that purpose lies not in controlling outcomes, but in faithfulness to the work itself. This is the deepest lesson the wilderness teaches. That hope is not the belief that everything will work out as we wish, but the conviction that our efforts matter regardless of the outcome. That what we build, what we protect, what we love, has value beyond our ability to guarantee its success. The soldiers settling into their bedrolls tonight carry this understanding in their bones. They've learned that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to move forward while afraid. That strength is not the ability to bear any burden, but the wisdom to know which burdens are worth carrying. And you, lying there with tomorrow's challenges already forming in your mind, you carry this same capacity, the same ability to choose purpose over comfort, progress over perfection, connection over isolation. The road to Laurel Hill winds through green hills and quiet valleys, through places where families once gathered for Sunday dinners and children played in summer twilight. Life continues, has always continued, will always continue, finding ways to flourish even in the spaces between conflicts. Your work, the weight you carry, the vision you're building. It's part of this same great continuation, not separate from the flow of human hope, but woven into it, adding your thread to the vast tapestry of those who choose to build rather than destroy, to heal rather than harm, to persist rather than surrender. The armies rest tonight, but they do not rest in despair. They rest in the quiet confidence that tomorrow will bring its own possibilities, its own chances to choose well, its own opportunities to serve something larger than themselves. As will you, as will you. Aftermath and reflection. The morning of May 8th dawns differently over the wilderness. The same Virginia sun rises through the same canopy of oak and pine, but something fundamental has shifted in the quality of light that filters down to the forest floor. Our signal corpsman moves through the aftermath with quiet steps, no longer the urgent, purposeful stride of battle preparation, but the slower, more thoughtful pace of one who has witnessed something that will take time to fully understand. The weight you carry tonight, it has this same quality, doesn't it? Not the sharp urgency of crisis, but the deeper, more complex burden of having seen clearly, of knowing what truly matters, and now living with that knowledge. The battlefield tells its story in fragments. An overturned supply wagon rests against a massive pine, its contents scattered, but somehow not chaotic. Hardtack and medical supplies, letters from home and ammunition, all mixed together in the democratic equality that crisis brings to human affairs. But notice, even here, even in this testament to disruption, the stream flows clear and steady just beyond. Water has this gift, this capacity to remain itself regardless of what happens around it. It absorbed the smoke of the fires, reflected the chaos of battle, yet this morning it runs as pure and purposeful as it did before 120,000 men entered this wilderness. The weight you carry, the complexity of what you're building, it doesn't have to muddy the essential clarity of who you are. The corpsman kneels beside this stream, fills his canteen with water that tastes of nothing but itself. No trace of smoke, no hint of the turmoil it has witnessed. Just water, doing what water does, flowing toward its destination with patient persistence. This is perhaps the deepest lesson the wilderness offers, that we can move through chaos without becoming chaotic, that we can witness disruption without losing our essential nature. In the field hospital, the work continues, but with a different rhythm. Dr. Matthews moves between patients with hands that have found their steadiest competence through crisis. Each wound dressed, each fever monitored, each small act of healing adding to a larger restoration that extends far beyond individual bodies. Sarah arranges supplies with movements that have become almost ceremonial in their precision, not the frantic efficiency of emergency, but the deeper satisfaction of work that serves life itself. They speak little, these two who found themselves on the same side of the only conflict that truly matters. But their silence carries the weight of shared understanding. Crisis strips away so much. But what remains is often more valuable than what was lost: the artificial divisions, the complicated justifications, the elaborate structures we build to avoid seeing clearly. All of this falls away, leaving only the fundamental choice between building and destroying, between healing and harming, between hope and despair. The wounded soldiers, Union and Confederate alike, rest in this space that transcends the boundaries that brought them here. Pain has its own democracy, suffering its own wisdom. A young Confederate private shares his water with a Union sergeant whose arm hangs in a rough sling. Neither speaks of politics or cause. They speak of home, of mothers who will worry, of work left undone, of the strange peace that comes from surviving something that seemed unsurvivable. This is what resilience actually looks like, not the dramatic gesture or the inspiring speech, but the quiet choice to remain human when circumstances invite us to become something less. The weight you carry. It tests this same capacity in you every day. The pressure to compromise what matters, to choose the expedient over the right, to let the urgency of building something eclipse the question of whether that something serves life or diminishes it. General Lee walks among his men in the early morning light, his presence carrying that same quality of quiet authority that needs no announcement. But watch how he moves. There's something different in his bearing today. Not defeat, not exactly, but a deeper recognition of what this conflict has revealed about the nature of leadership itself. He stops beside a young soldier who sits staring into the middle distance, and for a moment they simply share the silence that follows profound experience. No words of comfort, no false promises about easy victories ahead, just the recognition that some burdens are too large for any individual to carry alone. Leadership, real leadership, sometimes means simply standing present to the weight others carry, acknowledging that the path forward leads through difficulty rather than around it. The young soldier straightens slightly, not because his burden has been lifted, but because it has been witnessed, shared, recognized as worthy of respect rather than shame. Grant's tent sits in a small clearing, perhaps a mile away. Canvas walls that contain the maps and calculations of high strategy. But this morning those papers lie still and quiet. Inside, the general sits at his simple field desk, not writing orders or studying positions, but simply sitting with the knowledge that leadership in the face of uncertainty requires something deeper than tactical brilliance. His hands rest flat on the wooden surface. Hands that have signed orders sending thousands into danger. Hands that will sign more such orders before this conflict ends. But for now, in this quiet hour before the day's decisions begin, they simply rest. This is perhaps the most profound image the wilderness offers. The recognition that even those who carry the weight of others' lives must find moments of simple stillness, simple presence to what is rather than constant calculation of what might be. The morning light grows stronger, filtering through the canopy in shafts that illuminate without revealing everything at once. This is how understanding comes, not in sudden illumination that makes all things clear, but in gradual recognition that clarity itself is less important than faithfulness to what we know to be true. The corpsman climbs his pine tree one final time, not to observe troop movements or signal positions, but simply to see this landscape from the perspective that crisis has taught him to value. From this height, the wilderness spreads in all directions, dense and green and fundamentally unchanged by what it has witnessed. The stream catches sunlight and throws it back in fragments. The overturned wagon settles deeper into the earth that will eventually reclaim it. The paths worn by marching feet are already beginning to blur as new growth pushes through disturbed soil. Nature has this gift, this capacity to absorb human drama without being defined by it. The trees that sheltered both armies, the streams that gave water to Union and Confederate alike, the earth that received the blood of young men from farms and cities across a divided nation. All of this continues its own patient work of growth and renewal and quiet persistence. This doesn't diminish the significance of what happened here, but it places it in a larger context, a longer story of which this battle is one chapter rather than the entire book. The weight you carry, the urgency of what you're building, it matters deeply. But it matters as part of something larger than itself, something that will continue long after your particular contribution has been made. The armies begin to stir, not with the sharp energy of fresh conflict, but with the measured movements of those who have learned to conserve their strength for what truly requires it. Breakfast fires send thin streams of smoke into the morning air. Soldiers tend to equipment with the careful attention that experience teaches. Officers gather around maps with expressions that show the sobering effect of having seen theory tested by reality. But notice the small kindnesses that weave through these practical preparations. The sharing of coffee between men who barely know each other's names. The quiet assistance given to those whose wounds make simple tasks difficult. the letters written not to justify or explain, but simply to maintain the connections that make all other work meaningful. This is how healing happens, not through grand gestures or dramatic transformations, but through the accumulation of small choices to remain connected to what matters most. The weight you carry, it can isolate you, convince you that your burden is unique, that others cannot understand the complexity of your position. But the wilderness suggests something different, that shared humanity runs deeper than individual circumstance, that the fundamental challenges of leadership and purpose and faithful service are more universal than they appear in the darkness of 2 a.m. worry. Grant emerges from his tent as the sun clears the tree line, his uniform showing the wear of days spent close to the reality his orders create. He walks among the men with the same quiet presence that has become his signature, not the dramatic leadership of speeches and gestures, but the deeper authority of one who shares the weight he asks others to carry. A young lieutenant approaches with dispatches, reports from other theaters, requests for decisions that will shape the day ahead. Grant receives these papers with hands that remain steady, eyes that show the cost of command, but not the confusion that cost sometimes brings. He has learned something in this wilderness, something about the difference between confidence and certainty, between decisive action and reckless haste. The decisions he will make today, they will be made from this deeper understanding, this recognition that leadership means moving forward not because the path is clear, but because movement itself, faithful movement toward worthy purpose, creates the clarity that cannot be achieved through analysis alone. As our corpsman descends from his pine tree for the final time, as the armies prepare to continue their complex dance of strategy and survival, as the wilderness settles back into its ancient rhythms of growth and decay and renewal, something has been established that will outlast the immediate crisis that created it. Not victory or defeat in any simple sense, but something more valuable, the recognition that human beings can move through chaos without losing their essential humanity. That crisis reveals not our weakness, but our capacity for faithfulness to what matters most. That the weight we carry, the complexity of what we're building, these are not burdens to be escaped, but opportunities to discover what we're truly capable of when everything else falls away. The stream flows on, carrying the morning light toward destinations it has never seen, but trusts it will reach, patient and purposeful and utterly itself. As will you. Final images. 3 final images settle into stillness. Like photographs placed gently on a bedside table. The signal corpsman. Decades later, an old man now, sitting by his own window as dawn breaks over a world transformed. In his weathered hands, the same journal that captured those moments in the wilderness. He turns the pages slowly, not with nostalgia, but with quiet recognition. Every challenge he faced after those May days, every decision that kept him awake, every weight he carried, had been preparation for something larger than he could have imagined. The stream, still flowing, still carrying morning light toward unseen destinations. Patient, purposeful, utterly itself. And you, breathing softly now, the weight you carry transformed into something lighter, not because the challenges have disappeared, but because you've remembered what you've always known. You are building something that matters. You are exactly where you need to be. Rest now. Faithful builder, rest. Final images. The journal closes softly, its pages holding decades of wisdom earned through uncertainty, through choices made in darkness, through the patient work of building something meaningful. The tree, still standing on that distant hill, roots deep in Virginia soil, branches reaching toward countless dawns, a quiet monument to endurance, to the strength that comes not from avoiding storms, but from weathering them with grace. And the light, morning light, streaming through your window, touching your face as you surrender to sleep, the same light that has blessed countless builders before you, the same gentle illumination that will greet you tomorrow, ready to reveal new possibilities, new ways forward. 3 simple truths, carved deep by time, by struggle, by love. You are not alone in this work. What you're building matters. Rest is not surrender, it is preparation. Sleep well, faithful one, sleep well. The morning will come, and you will be ready. And final images. And now, 3 final images to carry you into sleep. See the signal corpsman's weathered hands, closing his journal one last time, the leather binding worn smooth by decades of faithful recording. Each page holds not just memories, but proof that difficult seasons can be weathered, that purpose endures beyond any single battle, that what matters most survives. See the great pine tree, still standing where he climbed so long ago. Its trunk scarred but unbroken, roots deep in Virginia soil. Storms have come and gone, seasons have turned, yet it remains, offering shelter, offering perspective, offering the quiet promise that strength grows slowly, surely through faithful endurance. And see yourself, dear builder, settling deeper into rest, the weight finally lifting from your shoulders, your breathing growing soft and even. Tomorrow's challenges remain, but they need not be carried tonight. You have done enough. You are enough. You are held by something larger than your fears. Sleep now. The morning will find you ready. Sleep now. Final images. And now 3 final images settle into your mind like gentle blessings, each one a quiet gift for the journey ahead. See the old signal corpsman, decades after the wilderness, sitting by his window as evening light fades. His weathered hands rest upon that leather journal, pages filled with a lifetime of observations about finding clarity in chaos. He smiles softly, knowing that every challenge faced, every weight carried, became part of something larger, something meaningful. His peace is earned, not given. See that ancient pine still standing, roots deep in Virginia soil, its trunk scarred by old fires but reaching ever skyward. Seasons have passed, storms weathered, yet it remains, offering shelter, offering strength to all who seek its shade. Like you, it has learned to bend without breaking, to endure without bitterness. And finally, see yourself, dear builder, wrapped in the deepest rest, your mind finally quiet, your heart finally still. The journal closes, the tree stands sentinel through the night, and you drift into dreams where all the weight you carry transforms into wisdom, where what you're building becomes a gift not just for others, but for the person you're becoming along the way.